New York City, 2001. No tall building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire. But that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11th. According to a 3-year comprehensive building and fire safety investigation just completed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or Nist.
Could one use a controlled demolition on any building? Sure. Did it happen to WTC 7 on 9/11? No, it did not.
Building 7 was no ordinary building. Among other key tenants, including several intelligence and law enforcement agencies, it also housed New York City's Emergency Operations Center.
Have you had anybody come up to you and say Building 7? Have you had Building 7?
No,
oh,
no.
Walk around. Yeah. Be on television a little more. You'll get the Building 7 guys.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
My name is Peter Michael Ketchum. I was born and raised in Wisconsin. I've spent much of my life in the high-performance and scientific computing world. I worked at Nist for 14 years. Starting in 1997, I initially joined the High-Performance Systems and Services Division, and a few years later was moved into the Mathematical and Computational Sciences Division. I also was chair of our Applied Mathematics Seminar Series and hosted that for several years.
This is Nist, the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
In the United States, standard setting is led by industry, but NIST plays a critical role in supporting, defining, and fostering that effort and coordinating it with the federal government. Over our long history, we have cultivated deep scientific roots that cut across a whole range of disciplines.
NIST was given the task of investigating the World Trade Center collapses that, of course, happened on 9/11.
Ranking Member Hall and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify on NIST's role in the investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Center towers.
I was not involved in those investigations or writing those reports, but I was certainly aware that that research study was going on. NIST's role, as I understand it, was to investigate the collapses of the 3 World Trade Center towers, and by that I mean towers 1, 2, and 7, and determine why they had collapsed.
The collapse of these towers was the worst building disaster in human history. Engineers, emergency responders, and the nation did not anticipate and were largely unprepared for such a catastrophe.
I began to look into this in July of 2016. It actually came up in a conversation with a friend that I'd known for 30 years, and she mentioned something along the lines of, gee, do you realize there is some growing evidence that the official 9/11 narrative may not be quite what we all thought it was? I didn't do anything for about a month. I think I just let it sink in. But in the middle of August, I felt very compelled to start investigating. And in a very short amount of time, it became clear to me that NIST's investigation of the collapse of the World Trade Centers was not a sincere and genuine study. And I quickly became furious. First, I was furious with myself. I couldn't believe that I had not noticed this before. How could I have not noticed this for the last 15 years? And that fury then quickly transferred to NIST, my former employer, who I had always thought very highly of, and always felt that NIST did research of the highest integrity. So to see what they had done, what NIST had done with the World Trade Center investigation and report, left me stunned.
Good morning. I'm here to summarize the findings from our 3-year study of the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. Before I tell you what we found, I'd like to tell you what we did not find. We did not find any evidence that explosives were used in the collapse of Building 7. We ran down detailed computer simulations of blast scenarios. This size blast would have produced an incredibly loud sound that was not recorded on videos of the collapse nor reported by witnesses.
You want to call your mother or something?
You gotta get back from here. You know that. You gotta get back. All right. I know.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
What became immediately obvious to me was that there was overwhelming evidence that all three of those towers, 1, 2, and 7, collapsed due to controlled demolition. And the Nist reports focused almost entirely on reasons due to fire and the associated plane crashes and jet fuel.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires.
What I saw was that the most likely cause, controlled demolition, was not investigated at all. In fact, it was dismissed in 1 or 2 sentences within the report.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. It looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself.
It was almost as if it were a planned implosion. It just pancaked.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dat heeft het team gedaan van experts.
This is the first time that we're aware of that a building over 15 stories tall has collapsed primarily due to fire.
What is special about Building 7, and I think why it has gotten as much attention as it has, is because it wasn't hit by a plane. So that cannot be used as a reason for why the building collapsed. Now, it did have some fires. They weren't terribly notable fires. They were rather modest, in my opinion. And to complicate matters even more, there was an obvious foreknowledge on the part of some people that seemed to know that this building was going to come down.
That building right there, the brown building, the tall one, is number 7 World Trade Center. I've heard several reports from several different officers now that that is the building that is going to go down next. In fact, one officer told me they're just waiting for that to come down at this point.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
Rescue workers pushed people away from the scene.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up.
Now, all these stories are not compatible. You cannot have a heavily built steel frame high-rise collapse due to modest fires. If that were the case, it would be extremely unusual for that to happen. So unusual that you could not possibly predict when or if it was going to happen. At the same time, you have people more or less waiting for it to come down, and in some cases, they had reported it had collapsed before it actually did.
We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7 in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
We've got some news just coming in, actually, that the Salomon Brothers building in New York, right in the heart of Manhattan, has also collapsed. There were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani.
The point is, that building is heavily built. There would be no reason to expect it to come down.
Can you confirm it was number 7 that just went in?
Yes, sir.
And you guys knew this was coming all day?
We had heard reports that the building was unstable and that it eventually would either come down on its own or it would be taken down.
We knew from the beginning of our study that understanding what happened to Building 7 on 9/11 would be difficult. It did not fit any textbook example of that you could readily point to and say, yes, that's why the buildings fell.
I believe there is a quote at one point that the Nist investigators said something along the lines they were having trouble getting a handle on why Building 7 had collapsed. Nist is extremely competent. So to have Nist be baffled by the collapse of a building that had only modest fires and exhibits every characteristic of controlled demolition, if they say they were coming up empty-handed and couldn't figure it out, that's not believable. Nist put forward a model for the collapse of Building 7 that appears to me that they were grabbing at straws.
Our study has identified thermal expansion as a new phenomenon that can cause the collapse of a structure. For the first time, we have shown that fire can induce a progressive collapse.
Now, when I was a kid, and many people today are probably too young for this, but there was a cartoonist called Rube Goldberg. He drew cartoons of these machines that did a very simple thing in an incredibly complex way. And it was meant to be humorous.
How does this door opener-upper really work? You see, waiter places cat B on pile of dirty dishes A. Now cat B sees mouse C. Of course, this is a stuffed mouse because he must be used for the next waiter.
It was meant to spoof the aspect of human nature that sometimes makes things far more complicated than they need to be. And these were called Rube Goldberg machines or Rube Goldberg devices.
And sets off bomb G, opening door H very gently.
The explanation that is given by Nist for the collapse of Building 7 sounds like a Rube Goldberg device.
You could have beams that are here that are restrained from expanding, prevented from expanding because of this column here, for example, and that can buckle. And you see an example of a buckled beam right here.
One column slides off of its seat on a few particular floors, and within a matter of moments, there is some chain reaction, like a set of dominoes, that brings the building entirely down.
It is possible that you could have a local failure as a result of a connection failing. But the likelihood of that failure dragging the entire building in such a fashion that all the columns would fail at the same time is an impossibility.
Impossibility?
Yes.
And you can see on the screen the column at the very right is column 79. And that's the column that first buckles, causing the floors to come down, followed by a quick succession of failures of adjoining columns.
Steel frame buildings don't do that. That doesn't happen. It's just fantasy land.
Here's our structural model showing the building collapsing, which matches quite well with the video of the event.
Does the model that Nist produced for World Trade 7 match what we actually saw? No.
We heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out. The building followed after that.
And, you know, I'm reminded of the old fairy tale of the emperor has no clothes. Everyone is watching the emperor go by and is being brainwashed to believe that the emperor has a beautiful set of clothes on when actually he's wearing nothing but underwear.
The emperor has no clothes on!
Now, what we see in the Nist model, first they only play the first few seconds of it. We only see a little bit of the building beginning to collapse. It is extremely atypical to build a computer model and create an animation of that model and to show only the first part of it. Why not follow through to the end? Where's the end? And what we do see doesn't match what we saw in reality. The animation for the Nist model of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 has the sides sort of kinking in and the top of it kind of bending funny. that is not what the video of the collapse of Building 7 shows. Building 7 came down almost straight down.
This was clearly, the way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. This is not, it's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
One of the things I noticed in Nist's investigation and reports is this fixation on collapse initiation, as if all that was required was to investigate up until the point that the collapses initiate. No, there's a lot more to the story than that. In fact, that's stopping just when it's getting interesting. But Nist makes a 1 or 2 sentence summary along the lines of, and then the building collapsed completely.
We were charged with finding out the cause of the collapse. And we found what happened. I think we've scientifically demonstrated what was required to initiate the collapse. Once the collapse initiated, the video evidence is rather clear. It was not stopped by the floors below, so there was no calculation that we did to demonstrate that, what is clear from the videos.
To investigate only up to collapse initiation is only doing part of the story and leaving out a great deal.
No, it may be that something fell off the building. It may be that something has fallen. We don't know, to be perfectly honest. But that is what you're looking at, is the current, that's the scene at this moment at the World Trade Center. Dan Daler from ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daler down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
Thanks very much,
completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
If the top of the building became unstable due to the weakening of columns, one would reasonably expect the top of the building to start to lean, start to creak, connections start to break, and the top of the building would simply fall off to the side and come crashing down on the buildings next door. And the rest of the tower would remain. That's what one would expect. Instead, we saw something quite different. It is not reasonable to think that the weakening of some columns near the impact zone could somehow lead to an entire building collapsing entirely down on itself, symmetrically into its own footprint, with nothing left but bits of dust. That's not plausible. That's not reasonable. Watch some of the videos of the collapses. Look for several things. Look for sudden onset. When the collapses start, they happen very fast, and they complete within 10, 11, 12 seconds. Second, look at the symmetry. These buildings come straight down, but almost straight down. Asymmetric damage does not lead to symmetric collapse. It is very difficult to get something to collapse symmetrically because it is the law of physics that things tend towards chaos. Collapsing symmetrically represents order, very strict order. It is not the nature of physics to gravitate towards order for no reason. It will gravitate towards chaos. It is very difficult to get a building to collapse symmetrically.
Mark Loiseau has been in this family business all his life. He knows what it takes to bring a building down.
The largest steel structure we've taken down, which I think is still a Guinness record, is the J.L. Hudson building in Detroit. It took months to design it. It took months to prepare the structure for the placement of the explosive charges. Months.
Third, look at the rubble that is left. It is not big pieces of steel, big chunks of cement. It is fine particles.
Surprisingly, so little rubble. Where did all the rubble go?
The concrete was pulverized, and I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you were on a foreign planet. All of lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust powdered 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
You have 2 110-story office buildings. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big. The building collapsed to dust.
And they might also look at those videos to see the explosive nature of those collapses. You can see essentially a wave of explosive demolition traveling down the building as it collapses. Explosions coming out of windows. Huge chunks of steel perimeter beams flying hundreds of feet off to the side. Steel does not fly off to the side hundreds of feet due to gravity. Gravity works vertically, not laterally. There has to be a force there, pushing it to the side. Otherwise, it would just fall down to the ground. It'd be like dropping a ball out of a window. It would just fall straight down. Why did Nist issue a report that seems to do everything it can to avoid investigating the most likely cause, in this case being controlled demolition? Why would Nist avoid that? Why would they try to do everything they could to avoid that? The only thing I can do is make some guesses, and I emphasize the word guess. Perhaps they were coerced, perhaps they were pressured. I don't know where that coercion or pressure might have come from, but it is not typical of NIST to do anything short of excellent. NIST is extremely meticulous about their research, and by necessity they need to be. That is what they excel at. This report does not fit that pattern at all.
We really have a new kind of progressive collapse that we have discovered.
One thing I think to understand is NIST is a really excellent place to work. And for many of the people who work there, this is a really good position, and they have a lot to lose. It is not all that hard to begin to pressure people, make offers they can't refuse, coerce them, and depending on the person or people involved, that can be anywhere from very subtle to very overt. The best I can do is speculate that something of that type happened.
We conducted the study without bias, without interference from anyone, and dedicated ourselves to do the very best job we could. And in fact, I would suggest that the public should really, at this point, recognize the science is really behind what we have said.
So why didn't I see it? I think the painful truth is that I was living in blindness and ignorance as to what had actually happened. I didn't give it much thought. I heard the official narrative, and like many people, I believed it.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the two buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion after that.
And I am ashamed to say that, but that's the truth. Once I took a look at it, it leapt out at me. This was not a case of some subtle differences or subtle discrepancies or differences of scientific opinion that needed further investigation. This was glaring, clear cut.
Getting behind the car. Don't have oxygen.
I think what has allowed the official story to stand for this long is a combination of several things. One is complacency. Another one is fear. And the third is ignorance. There are probably many people that just have not looked at it, don't understand it. They just simply are not aware. In other cases, it's complacency. They have a sense of what might be going on, but they're maybe not too interested in putting the effort into finding out. And there could be others that have a very strong sense of what they think is going on, but they are gripped in fear, they're paralyzed in fear. The reason that I have spoken out about this is very simple. I spoke out because I believed it was the right thing to do. I have no other motive. It would be nice at this point if someone who is currently a Nist employee would also speak out, but that is up to each individual there to decide. What I am seeing is that with respect to the World Trade Center collapses, the official narrative is beginning to unravel. I think there is a good chance that that unraveling will continue and perhaps accelerate. But it could be highly volatile. If it does continue to unravel, I think there could be some very painful revelations that will be very hard for our country to accept.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
And I don't in any way make light of that. It could be very painful.
Americans should not expect one battle, but a lengthy campaign, unlike any other we have ever seen.
But the wounds of 9/11 have remained unhealed for too long. And they are festering, and rotting, and they are infected. When you have a wound on the body, one of the first things you do is you wash it out with hot soapy water. And then you bandage it up. And yeah, it hurts. It hurts while you're washing it. It stings. It's a sharp pain. But you get the bandage on, and the pain starts to die down, and a few hours pass, it's down to just a soreness. My point is that truth is the hot, sudsy water with which we wash out the wounds of 9/11 so that they can begin true healing.